before we get started, you forgot to give me my shirt.
Oh!
Yeah, remember my shirt? You promised? You were like, hey, I'm going to bring your shirt today. I got you all set. I was like, yes. All right. So, my shirt.
Yeah. I think I forgot it. I forgot it. Sorry.
But you promised. You said you wouldn't forget. You promised.
I know, and I didn't mean to forget. I'm sorry. But this is a nice shirt too. God gave us a spirit of power. That's a great shirt.
Yeah.
Is that okay, guys? He's gonna wear that shirt today. I'm sorry about that. I didn't mean to break my promise.
It's
I
okay.
didn't.
It's
But
okay.
you know what? Actually, today we're gonna be talking about how God is faithful. And one thing about God being so faithful is that He doesn't break His promises.
That's a good thing.
There's no promise that He's ever broken. Everything He's always said that He's going to do, He's done. So when God says He's going to do something, we can actually trust and believe and know that it's going to happen. Unlike me. Sorry.
It's okay.
But today we're going to talk about how God is faithful. And so being faithful, part of that is keeping promises that you've made. And part of that is also knowing that that person is going to be there no matter what. Through good times and bad times. God is faithful. So, and one of His promises is that He'll never leave us or forsake us. And God stays true to that promise. So we're going to hear about a guy in the Bible. His name is Joseph. Now, the story of Joseph is kind of a long story. It goes over a couple different chapters in the book of Genesis. So we're only going to be able to show you parts of it, and then we're kind of going to sum up a little part of it for you too. But the story of Joseph is incredible because he definitely goes through some good times and some bad times. But it is so evident that God is with him through all of it because God is faithful. So let's watch the first part of Joseph's story.
All right, let's go, guys.
Now Jacob loved Joseph more than all his children. Also, he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably to him. Now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So he said to them, "Please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were, binding grain stalks in the field. Then behold, my grain arose and also stood upright, and indeed your grain stood all around and bowed down to mine." And his brothers said to him, "Shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Look, I have dreamed another dream. And this time the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me." So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you?" And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock of sheep. Then Jacob said to Joseph, "Please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me." So he sent him. Now when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him. Then they said to one another, "Look, this dreamer is coming. Come, therefore, let us now kill him and cast him into some pit, and we shall say, 'Some wild beast has devoured him.' We shall see what will become of his dreams." But Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands and said, "Let us not kill him." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father." So it came to pass, when Joseph had come to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the tunic of many colors that was on him. Then they took him and cast him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. And they sat down to eat a meal. Then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites coming with their camels on their way to Egypt. So Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh." And his brothers listened. So the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. And they took Joseph to Egypt. Then Reuben returned to the pit. And indeed, Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes. And he returned to his brothers and said, "The lad is no more, and I, where shall I go?" So they took Joseph's tunic, killed a kid of goats, and dipped the tunic in the blood. Then they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, "We have found this. Do you know whether it is your son's tunic or not?" And he recognized it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him. Without doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces." Then Jacob mourned for his son many days, and all his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted. Thus his father wept for him.
Whoa! Can you believe that happened? His own brothers. Now that is
Wow.
some kind of jealousy.
That is crazy.
Yes. So I'm sure at this point, Joseph is in a really dark place in his life.
You gotta be.
I know, but listen to what the Bible says. So this is in chapter 39. And so Joseph got sold to Potiphar, who was an officer of Pharaoh. And the Bible says the Lord was with Joseph, and he was a successful man. So everywhere that Joseph goes in his story, he finds favor because God is with him. So first he goes to Potiphar's house, and he's so successful there that Potiphar puts him in charge of things. And so he ends up being in charge of a lot of things, and it's not until Potiphar's wife tells lies about Joseph and gets him in trouble with Potiphar, and then he gets thrown into jail. So it's like things are starting to look good for Joseph, and then, now he's put in jail. Things are bad again. But Joseph still believes that God is with him and that God has a plan and that God's going to fulfill that dream that he showed him. So then Joseph's in jail. He meets some people in jail, and they find out that he's able to interpret dreams. God gives him answers and explanations for people's dreams. So the other two people in jail, they end up leaving. They're people who work for the Pharaoh. And Joseph tells them, "When you get out, remember me." And so they didn't. They got out of jail. They didn't remember Joseph. So it wasn't until 2 years later that the Pharaoh, who's the guy like in charge of everything in Egypt at the time, he has a dream, and nobody can interpret it or tell him what it means. And so he's like, "Is there anybody who can tell me what this means?" Well, the guy who was in prison with Joseph's like, "Hey, wait a minute.
I know a guy.
Yeah, there was this guy in prison, and his God was able to tell what dreams meant." So Pharaoh calls for Joseph, "Get him up out of prison." He tells him about his dream, and he says, "I heard you can interpret dreams." And Joseph answered Pharaoh saying, "It is not in me. God will give Pharaoh an answer of peace." So Joseph knows God has been with me this whole time. God has everything in control, and this is all part of God's plan. So Pharaoh tells him about the dream, and Joseph explains to him what it means. For 7 years, there was going to be a lot of food in the land, and that they need to collect it up and store it and have these lots of extra food during these good years. Then for 7 years, there's going to be no food in the land. And so then they're going to be able to live off of everything that they've stored up. So Joseph tells Pharaoh about that. Pharaoh is like, "Whoa, well, if you know this much, I'm putting you in charge." So again, Joseph finds favor because God is with him. So Joseph is now like second in command in all the land. Nobody's above him except for Pharaoh. And so Joseph is the guy who is handing out food to people. And guess who's hungry?
Let's see.
Jacob and his family were in trouble. They did not have enough food to eat. No one had enough food to eat. So when Jacob learned that there was food in Egypt, he sent 10 of his sons to buy some grain. His son Benjamin stayed home. In Egypt, Joseph was in charge of giving out food. The brothers came to him and bowed down. Joseph knew who they were, but they did not recognize him. Joseph remembered his dreams of his brothers bowing down to him. Those dreams from long before were coming true. Joseph decided to test his brothers. "I think you are spies," Joseph told them. "You are here to spy on the land." But the brothers said, "No, we are not spies. We are brothers. There were 12 of us, but our youngest brother is at home with our father, and another brother is dead." Joseph put his brothers in prison for 3 days. Then he said, "Bring your youngest brother back to me to prove that you are not spies, but one of you must stay here." The brothers went home with food for their families, and one of them stayed in Egypt. They told their father everything that had happened, and their father was very upset. But when all the food was gone, Jacob asked his sons to go back to Egypt. So the brothers returned to Egypt with their brother Benjamin. They took money to pay for their food, and they took a special gift for Joseph. Joseph invited all the brothers to his home for a meal. After the meal, Joseph sent away all of the attendants. He cried and told his brothers, "I am Joseph, your brother. You sold me into Egypt, but do not be afraid. God sent me here so I could save your people from the famine." Joseph told his brothers to go home and bring their families back to Egypt where they would have enough food. Jacob's family was blessed in Egypt, but Jacob got older and died. Now Joseph's brothers were afraid Joseph would punish them for what they did to him. And Joseph said to them, "Do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? But as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, in order to bring about, as it is this day, to save many people alive. Now therefore, do not be afraid. I will provide for you and your little ones." And he comforted them and spoke kindly to them.
Wow! Can you believe it's Joseph's brothers that need him? And that dream that he had so long ago when he was just a kid
Came true.
came true. And you know, sometimes when I have this light here, it's kind of bright. Ooh, can you see it? So this light kind of reminds us of all God's promises. And when things are good in our life, it's easy to remember all the things that God has promised us. Yeah, it's easy to go, "Oh yeah, I know God is with me because everything's going great right now." But in times of darkness, when our situations are kind of dark and cloudy, we start to think, "Oh, things are so bad. Maybe, just maybe, God's not with me." But He is. He's still with you. Maybe your situation kind of clouds things a little bit, but God is still shining just as bright. Just because your situation is a little bit darker, it's important that we still remember all of those promises that God makes to us in the Bible. And that's where we can find His promises.
Yes.
So, special challenge time.
Do it.
To help us remember that God is faithful, I want you guys to go on a promise search through the Bible. So I want you and your family to look for something that God promises you in the Bible. And I want you to post it in the comments. That way all of us can read all these awesome promises that God has given us so that we can remember that God is faithful and He is with us. Because if He said it, He's going to do it.
I love it. Let's do it, guys.
So we can't wait to see all the many promises of God that show up in the comments. Thank you guys for watching. We miss you so much, and we'll see you guys next week.